Hey there everybody. So I made this set of double-sided stackable rocks a few weeks ago to use for tabletop wargaming, and I would like to have more of them. Plus I got a request for a tutorial on how to make these, so here it is. I'm going to try and describe my sculpting techniques as best I can. I used 2-inch thick foam sheets for this project. I realize that those aren't available in a lot of countries, but hopefully the techniques can be carried over and repurposed. I get this stuff in 4-foot by 8-foot sheets in big box hardware stores. Foam sheets are expensive, so I always try and find one that's damaged, and then I ask for a discount. For our purposes, the damage doesn't really matter, and frankly, I cut these sheets up in the parking lot anyway so I can fit them in my car. Also, please do not damage a perfectly good piece of foam. That's the stock boy's job right there. You let the stock boys take care of that, and then you can take the damaged inventory off the store's hands. I've done that a few times now. Sometimes I have to check a few hardware stores before I find a damaged piece. So as you can see, this is a partially used piece of foam. It's already got some great texturing on the one side. I'm going to divide this up into smaller pieces, varying in size from say a forearm's length to a hand's breadth. Or to keep it simple, 2 small pieces for every big piece. One of the mistakes I made with the first set of these rocks was making each piece a similar size, and I felt that was kind of limiting. I wanted this set to have more modularity to it. After tracing out the basic shape of the rocks, I used my trusty fiberware knife to stab cut some jagged lines. Watch out for those fingers. After 2 passes with the knife, I used a 2x4 to get some leverage and snap those suckers off. You wouldn't really have to do too much more texturing to the sides, but those flat sides have got to go. At this point I had about 10 slabs to work with, but I did end up cutting a few of those in half. I don't really have an order that I do these sculpting steps in, but for the sake of this video, the first thing I do is choose the top side and I start carving out some V-shaped cracks. It's kind of like connecting the dots. I connect the crack lines to the edges where I imagine the rock would have a natural break. Sometimes you have to actually create that natural break. Wear a mask, by the way. Sometimes the cracks meet up in the center, sometimes the cracks are narrow, sometimes they're wide. Variety is key here, is what I'm trying to say. You can extend the cracks down the sides of the foam as well by pushing the blunt edge of the knife in and wiggling it back and forth. This creates the look of like a deeper crack. I'm going to be talking about cracks a lot here, so it was pretty hard to write the script for this video without sounding dirty. In addition to building those cracked paths, I like to make shallow cuts just below the top of the edge of the foam and then peel portions of that foam away. That gives it the appearance of layered rocks. I like doing that around the spots where the cracks meet the edges, and then also I'll just go around the perimeter and just pick out spots. Usually where there's like a pointed edge, that's a good spot to pull off a layer of rock to add that layered rock effect. While I'm doing all this, I'm trying to maintain an overall flat surface on the tops for the minis to stand on. And once one side is done, I flip the foam and do the same thing to the other side. I try to use a different pattern of cracks on the opposite side so that there's a little bit more variety. Another technique that I use a lot to create a layered rock effect is this. I cut a very sharp and jagged line on the top side of the foam and I peel some of that away. This is similar to what I do around the edges, and I often use these 2 techniques together. These sharp cuts should all be made from the same direction. Just imagine slabs of rock sitting on top of each other. After I'm done texturing both sides of the foam, I clean up the edges. This section was cut out with a hot wire cutter for a previous project, giving it that very distinct wavy pattern that you get with a hot wire cutter. I don't want that pattern for this set of rocks, so I'm cutting out some bits here to kind of hide that shape. When you break foam apart, you get these loose beads. You'll see them all over the place. To me, those beads really give away that this is foam. So to get rid of them, I use my thumb and I just kind of rub in a downward motion to peel them off. This area was a little too flat, so I added some texture. This crisscross technique is great for creating a layered rock appearance. It's pretty effective, but I like to use it sparingly. And when I'm cutting the crisscross pattern, I try and match the angles of any of the cuts on the tops and the bottoms of the foam. The goal here is to create a cohesive layered rock effect throughout the entire piece. And that's one of the reasons I'm using it sparingly here, because the tops might not always match the bottoms. Also, as I'm doing this, I try to collect as many of the scraps as possible. You'll see how many scraps I get from this project later on. It's a pretty decent amount. I didn't leave any clean edges on any of these pieces. Adding texture to the sides allows for more options when you're combining pieces on the battle map. Just a few more quick notes about my texturing process. I use a rock to blend in the remaining smooth areas and give them a bit more texture. Using a smooth rock helps to avoid creating any unnaturally straight edges. And here's another example of me using the blunt edge of the knife to cut out some cracks. This whole process takes me about 30 minutes for the smaller rocks and upwards of an hour, maybe even an hour and a half for the larger ones. It's very time consuming and it's also pretty hard on the wrists, so I like to do maybe 4 rocks at a time max. The sculpting is by far the most time consuming part of this, but I think it's well worth it. On to the painting process. For the first layer, I'm using a mixture of water, Mod Podge, black and white paint, and black leather dye. I'm just trying to use up some of my leather dye here. I have quite a bit, but you could use any black ink or even just black paint would probably be fine, as long as you mix it with Mod Podge. This is just a base coat to hide and protect the foam. It should be about the consistency of syrup. It's hard to get full coverage, but I at least try and get full coverage with this layer. Then I set them up on an angle to dry for at least 12 hours. Do this in a well-ventilated area. Next, I added some white paint and Mod Podge to the first mixture. To get a lighter mid-tone gray, I apply a thin coat of this, and again, I'm still trying to get full coverage. So this step is optional because I know what a pain grout is to work with. Over a large piece of cardboard, I'm sprinkling grout on top of this layer and blending it in with the paint by hand. You should definitely wear a mask and gloves for this. This is sanded grout, by the way. Grout comes in many colors. I'm using a tan color for this. On the first batch of the rocks, I really let the color of the grout show through, but on these rocks, I'm working it into the paint a little more because I want this set of rocks to be pretty gray, and I'm mostly just adding it for the texture here. I did do a little bit of color blending, but not nearly as much as I did with the first batch. Now doesn't that look nice? See how the base coat shows through in some spots? The addition of the grout creates this look of dirt and gravel in the cracks and crevices. I think it really enhances the texture, and obviously there are other ways you could achieve this, but this is just how I do it. The grout really soaks up the moisture, so this layer will be pretty dry right off the bat, but I still like to let these sit for at least a few hours to dry. Next, we're going to mix up some paint and Mod Podge to make a lighter gray. Give the entire rock a dry brushing, using vertical strokes on the edges and circular strokes on the top. And after that's dry, we're just going to use white paint and Mod Podge. Dry brushing again, just catching the edges this time, using circular strokes and very light pressure, just a hair and some air, as Bob Ross would say. You could probably stop here if you want, but I wanted this set to be darker, so I mixed up a wash. This was kind of like a really thinned down version of the first layer. Water, Mod Podge, dye, paint, and a bit of wood glue. If you want your wash to have a bit more staying power, just add some glue. I almost forgot to throw on some gloves for this. Here's a comparison with and without the wash. I like them both, honestly. I used a paper towel to wipe off some of the excess wash. I laid these out on an angle to dry, and I flipped them every 15 minutes or so to make sure that there was no pooling. Once I was sure the wash had settled on both sides, I let the rock slabs dry overnight. At this point, I applied a matte clear finish. I'd suggest doing 2 thin coats of this, one side at a time, and make sure that that's good and dry before flipping the slabs. I ended up having some spots where the varnish pooled because I sprayed too much on. It wasn't too bad to repair though. And here's the scrap foam that I got from this set. I don't like to throw these away, so I'm going to save them for some future projects. Now, despite trying to get full coverage, you're probably still going to have a few spots where the matte spray finds some exposed foam to eat. Just go in with some Mod Podge, black paint, and a small brush and clean those areas up. And that's how I make modular double-sided rocks. I made some small 1-inch rocks for this set as well, which I think really add to the playability of this set. Laying a few around the edges of the 2-inch foam prevents models from hiding just over the edges, which seems to happen a lot. Since this set is gray, it's going to go with almost any battle map, especially with the incorporation of a little bit of atmospheric lighting. For the first set, I used a more brownish color scheme, and here they are side by side. I think they both look good. That just gives you an idea of what a brown version would look like. Maybe I'll expand that set someday too. I built up a little mountain in the center of the map here. As you can see, this set has a lot of flexibility. Here are a few pictures of these rocks with different lighting options. If you want to see more builds like this, I would appreciate it if you would like and subscribe. I do tabletop terrain, battle reports, and reviews. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you have a good day, and I will see you later.